Okay, Doug, thank you so much. And as we are used to saying, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, ladies and gentlemen and ladies. I want to welcome you to what is definitely going to be an eye opener in terms of the topic that we have lined up, which is about the future, futures literacy, and why this particular skill, this particular important skill, is missing. And by the way, as I've been interested in this particular topic, I attended one of Charlotte's earlier webinars, and I got to know that UNESCO actually has futures literacy as one of their pillars. And so, again, there's so much to learn about this particular topic and so much that we can discuss. But I want to go ahead and introduce the star of our show today, our speaker, Charlotte. Charlotte, as I alluded to earlier, I met her through attending one of her webinars, and I've had the opportunity of being in several of them and participating in them. And not only is the topic illuminating, but the way that Charlotte approaches it and breaks it down makes it very interesting, even for people who might have no idea of what the futures are. So Charlotte is a futures alchemist. That's what she calls herself. She's a futurist keynote speaker who works with organizations to co-create preferred futures. She's also the author of a number of books on the topic, including Futures Alchemist, which presents her narrative of how to use her map, compass, and guide model, I'm sure she'll talk a little bit about this, to navigate unknown futures. And not only that, she hosts a podcast and a series called Futures Facets, and she interviews people all around the world to gain an understanding of how we see the future from different points of view. Now, in addition, Charlotte is a well-known speaker in South Africa. She's the immediate past president of the Professional Speakers Association of Southern Africa and vice president of the Global Speakers Federation. And of course, goes without saying, a member of the Association of Professional Futurists. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor to welcome our speaker for the day. I'm going to hand over to Charlotte. Charlotte, take it away.
Eric, thank you so much. And I am delighted to be here. One of my values is, connecting, and that's one of the reasons for the podcast, is to be able to get the points of view and the perspectives and the experiences and the insights of people around the world. And I just love I host these open webinars. And I very intentionally try and invite people to come and attend from different parts of the world. And when you have someone in the room, there's a man from Pakistan who attends quite often. And there's one conversation with this man from Pakistan and a man from Mexico, and they were agreeing and they're discussing something that had come up. And just to be able to get that insight is so valuable, which is why when Derek mentioned the Global Chamber, I thought, oh, this is absolutely a beautiful idea, because just to have people coming together intentionally from around the world to learn and share and grow and develop their businesses is just absolutely phenomenal. So I'm going to get started sharing my presentation. And I'm going to start with this. It's a quote that my daughter actually came up with, and she helps me post some content to my website. And she posted this, and then I discovered it. Are we able to mute? So this quote is, we humans invented literacy, which means it doesn't come for free with our genes like speech or vision. Every brain has to learn it afresh. Now, we know that we need to learn how to read our ABCs. We need to learn how to read books. Maybe we learn another language, and language learning comes sort of naturally if you're in conversation, but how to read it, how to write, how to communicate in another language is a learned skill. And then we often hear about financial literacy, in that we need to understand how numbers work and how compound interest works, either in your favor or against you if you've got big debt. And these are literacy things that we need to learn in order to be able to communicate and operate in the world. And futures literacy now becomes one of those things we need to learn. And I'll tell you why it's important. This is a family photo. Sorry, there just seems to be someone who's not muted and I'm not able to assist there. Thank you. All right, so this is a family photograph of my father's family. In the front row, there are 2 young girls and 2 young boys. My dad is the one who is old enough to wear jeans, pants at least, in that family photograph. And behind him to the side is my Oma and Opa. That's my grandmother and grandfather. And it's an old-fashioned photograph. My dad is elderly. But many years ago, when I was in my second last year of high school, we had a family lunch at my grandparents' house. And during the lunch, the conversation came up. So what is Charlotte going to do when she leaves school? And my dad had it mapped out. He wants me to go to university and get a Bachelor of Commerce degree and maybe to do an extra year with 1 year of law, and then to get a job in an insurance company, preferably a multinational insurance company, and then in my very first paycheck to start paying into a retirement annuity. If I did those 3 things, that degree, that type of job, and a contribution to my retirement annuity, I will be set for life. My career will be fine. I will have no challenges or problems. And being a rebellious teenager, I went to university and did a BA instead. So I did not quite follow my father's advice, although I did start contributing to my retirement annuity right at the beginning. But what is interesting is that for my father, because of the experiences that he had had, that his parents had had, because he was actually in the financial services industry, because of what he saw with his clients and people he dealt with, he knew that if you don't get these things right, you're going to suffer a lot of problems in the future. So he wanted to protect me and create the security bubble around me so that I wouldn't be buffeted by things that might challenge me in the future. He really did mean the best for me, but he could not see how the world would unfold. He had a very specific view of what the world should be like. And it certainly wasn't an adventurous one that would explore unknown topics. So this is a photograph of me, any minute now, there we go. This is a photograph of me speaking at an event. This is the work that I do. And it's actually a lovely photograph because it encapsulates the last 4 careers that I have. So here it is, I'm speaking in front of an audience. I'm a professional speaker. And I'm speaking about futures issues. I'm talking to them about how to prepare their organizations for the future. The topic that I'm actually addressing with that particular slide, if you look really closely, it's a footprint. It's a digital footprint. So I was talking about being online, being on the internet, having social media, having your website, what that meant for this type of organization. What type of organization was this? Well, these people in the room were all association executives. And when Derek introduced me, he told you that I'm immediate past president of PSASA, vice president of GSF. I'm a professional member of the Association of Professional Futurists. I love associations. I am an association executive. And a lot of the work I do is for associations or for membership bodies like your chamber. So this photograph shows me as a professional speaker, a professional futurist, an expert in social media and digital media, and an association executive. Those were 4 careers, none of which I could have studied when I was at university, none of which my father could have anticipated for me, and none of which I could have anticipated, frankly, when I started out. And so when we look at a situation like that, this is me living my dream, living my best life, doing the work that lights me up, the work that I know is meaningful for the world. And it fulfills me a great deal more than having a secure job in a multinational insurance company ever would have. But the security element isn't there. It's a much more of a risky, adventurous lifestyle. But it's the skills that I've learned over the years that have allowed me to have this kind of positioning rather than the kind of skills that were given me in a more safe environment. So what does this illustrate? What is the actual problem we have? Is that we still educate people, this 18th century model. We educate young children to work in safe environments. If not in a factory, then in an office which is pretty much like a factory. We try and prepare children for the jobs that are out there from the big corporations or from the government departments that can hire them. We do not prepare children with the skills that they need to create new work, to create jobs, to be entrepreneurial, to prepare them for jobs that don't even exist yet. So out of the careers that I'm experiencing right now, the work that I'm doing, I couldn't have studied any of those in university, but I could have learned the skills that would have prepared me. One of the most valuable things I learned at university was my philosophy class. Nobody gets a paid job as a philosopher anymore, but it taught the critical thinking, the complex problem-solving skills that I need these days. And that's not the kind of thing that anybody really wants to invest in, because it doesn't look like a safe kind of education and preparation. So we're preparing children this way. We're teaching them an old-fashioned model. I know that there are bright sparks around the world of education companies, education innovators who are doing different things, but the majority of the children around the world are still being educated this way. But when they leave school, they're going to be experiencing a world that looks more like this, where everything is much more virtual, much more interactive, lots of different information streams coming to us, and we have to deal with all of these conflicting ideas and challenging ideas and information from around the world and competing demands on our attention. School does not prepare us for that. And if school doesn't prepare us for that, then we all go into our jobs, into our careers at a disadvantage. And the older we are, the more we have to try and catch up and learn skills that younger people are learning, sometimes by themselves because their schools are not providing those skills. And we have to learn those skills to keep up so that we can actually still be relevant in the marketplace. Because if we are educated and if we keep that framework of that old-fashioned education system, we become very quickly irrelevant. Irrelevant individuals, irrelevant employees, irrelevant skill sets, irrelevant companies, irrelevant organizations producing irrelevant products and irrelevant services. It just is not going to work. So we have to adapt. And if we can't go back to school to learn these things, then we have to find a new way to learn this literacy for the future. So how do we do this? What are we actually looking at? We have a new language we need to explore, a new ABC. We need to find new ways to think about the future and to anticipate problems that are coming. So let's just play with a few of these ideas. I mean, this is a very broad topic with lots of information, but I want to give you some ideas that you can kind of hang on and try and identify in your daily life and see if they are actually applicable. The first A is to anticipate the future, and anticipation is actually a future skill. If you're watching a movie and the music is kind of gearing up and the scene is getting more tense and the director is he's stretching out this moment, you know that you are anticipating something that is going to be surprising or scary, or it's going to give you a shock. You're going to feel the tingle with your adrenaline if you're really engaged in this movie. That anticipation for the next few seconds in a movie is the anticipation we need to evolve for how we're looking at the world. So we're not just projecting numbers into the future. We want to anticipate things that could happen to challenge those numbers, to give us a different result. So anticipation is something we really need to work on and try and develop as a way of considering what is coming. So let's give you a few ideas of anticipations that didn't go well. This is a quote from Thomas Watson, who was the IBM chairman in 1943. I think there is a world market for maybe 5 computers. Now, there's 2 things about this particular quote, which is really interesting. The first is, when I was in school, probably about my 2nd or 3rd last year of school, we had a typing room. We had a room where the typewriters were there. So certain girls went to learn how to type because maybe they were going to be secretaries in the future. There wasn't a computer department in our school. But one of the other schools that was a little bit better funded than ours started a computer department. And they invited 5 children from each of the neighboring schools to come and join them. And how the teachers chose those 5 students was based on their mathematics mark. And I was a good math student, so I got chosen to go to this school. We got bussed out twice a week to go and learn computers. And where they really started right from the beginning about teaching us about IBM and about punch cards. And if there are younger people in the room, and I apologize for these old references to what computers used to be like in the past. I remember my very first day on the internet. So I have come a long way in this time. But I go home very excited, and I tell my parents, I tell my father that we're learning about computers, and I learned about IBM. So he says, do you know what IBM stands for? And I said, no. So he tells me what IBM stands for. And the next time I go back to the school to which I've been invited, to this teacher that I don't know, I put up my hand and I say, I know what IBM stands for. It was the last time I trusted my father. He told me it stood for It's Better Manually. And it's actually International Business Machine. So everybody's laughing. I laughed along, and then I worked out that I was the butt of my own father's joke. But this was our introduction to how computers worked. And back in 1943, the man who ran International Business Machines thought that there was only a world market for 5 computers. Now, this particular example, this quote, is used over and over again online. Almost mocking Thomas Watson for how little foresight he had about what the future could be. But we have to understand that the world was very different, that the computers were very different from what we experience at the moment. I'm sitting at a desk right now, and to hand, I can touch 3 computers on my desk. And that's not even what's in the rest of the house. But computers back in those days, this is an example of something. Now, I don't know if anybody wants to pop into the chat box. What do you think that is? It's not a computer, but what do you think that actually is? Any ideas? They've got not a crane, a lifting thing that they're lifting this huge device into an airplane. They're going to fly it away somewhere. Any idea what that is? Anybody want to take a risk? Dana, it's not an ice machine, but they probably needed ice to keep things cool because these things got very hot. It's a microchip, Chris. Yes, it is actually a drive, a 5 megabyte drive. 5 megabytes. I mean, you can't even get a picture. You know, our pictures are like gigs big these days. That was a 5 megabyte hard drive, and if that was the size of the hard drive, you can imagine how big the computers were. The computers filled huge rooms. They had to be cooled down. They processed information on punch cards. This was a very manual process and a huge process. There was no micro anything about this. If you want to look at microchips, then what we have here is a 1 terabyte microchip. So a guy is holding 1 terabyte microchip in his hands. What is that? Like, how do we kind of measure these scales? Because our brains aren't really designed to compute these huge things. So let me try and give this to you. This is 1 terabyte is 1 million megabytes, or 200,000 of the devices that are being lifted up into that airplane. That was the state of computers back in 1943. So, you know, decades ago to what we have now, things have evolved so quickly. When we are anticipating the future, we need to bear these kinds of pictures in mind, that what we think are big insurmountable problems right now could be very easily solved in the future. What we look at the moment and we extrapolate in our human brains, which are pretty phenomenal, but we extrapolate based on our imagination to what this could look like next year or next decade, and we're anticipating what that looks like. We're basing that on what we know, what we already understand. And if we have a small worldview, if we have a small experience of what is going on in the world, and we try and project into the future what that looks like, we're projecting from our experience rather than really understanding what there could be out there that could challenge our experience or our perception or our imagination. The world is getting so much faster these days. So we're living in an exponential world where things are getting faster and quicker. And there's a quote from Peter Diamandis who talks about, in the past, we lived in a local and linear world. So we knew people locally here in Cape Town. And linear was, we expect next year to be 10% better than last year. We just extrapolate based on what we've already experienced. Peter Diamandis says, at the moment, not in the future, but today, we are living in a global and an exponential world. So here we are having a global chamber meeting. We're meeting around the world because we can do that on Zoom, and things are getting faster and faster and more complex and more choices. And that is the world we're living in right now. If we can't keep up with that, there's no way that we can keep up ourselves and our businesses and our solutions for our clients into the future unless we develop some skills to do that. And that is a problem that we're facing when we don't have futures literacy. Now, just because I think Thomas Watson was actually a good, decent chap who just was limited by his current experience, I want to just remind us that IBM now has an artificial intelligence program called IBM Watson. And IBM Watson is designed to learn. It's a learning program, and it can collate huge amounts of data in any particular field, and then it can produce kind of reports or responses or assessments on information based on that. So one of them would be in the legal field. A version of IBM Watson is being programmed with a whole lot of case history, all the things that young article clerks as brand new lawyers, they have to go through all those books and those case histories to work out what the precedent is for a particular case that they're dealing with at the moment. IBM Watson can do all of that way faster, way more comprehensively, and very often a lot more accurately. In the legal field, in the medical field, this has been applied so well. So IBM Watson, IBM at least wanted to honor Watson and say, he didn't get everything wrong. He really did set up IBM for the future eventually. But that is the world that we're living in, where an artificial intelligence machine already can do better than we can in terms of medical diagnosis and legal precedent, which is not to say that we don't need doctors and we don't need lawyers, that we're all going to lose our jobs. It means that it's a time for humanity to evolve to a new way of operating where we're being uniquely human, because all the things that we're just processing data can be done by a machine. So anticipating the future means knowing that it's getting faster, it's getting more complex, and we need to prepare because we need to know that things are going to be different and different from what we expect. That was our A. Let's go on to B. B is to challenge your beliefs. Now, this is, I just want to always put this comment in beforehand, is that I'm not trying to say that anybody's beliefs are wrong or faulty or holding you back in any way. The challenge is that if you cannot hold up a belief that you have and shine a light on it and make an assessment of it and decide whether or not you're going to keep that belief or not, then you're going to be in trouble. The people who, and I've seen people do it, I've seen a person close her eyes, cover her ears, because she did not want to hear what I was going to say. Because what I was going to say was going to challenge the way she had constructed her world and her business and what was going to happen. And she didn't want to hear the news about the future that could unsettle her. We have to challenge our beliefs, whatever they are, and then keep them if they still serve us. We can also challenge other things. We can challenge business models, and we can challenge things that we've been taught in the past. We can challenge how our business operates. Anything that no longer serves us into the future needs to be challenged. It either needs to be updated, or it needs to be removed, or we need to find something or create something new, a new model, a new way of moving into the future. And that's a scary thing that a lot of people are challenged with. But I'd like you to think about that. All right, so let's look at some things about time and about history, about the world that we might just want to think about. This is just an easy way to kind of move into challenging our beliefs generally. The first is that we tend to think of things in a linear fashion. We think of time as linear. We have timelines. For example, when COVID first started, there were all these timelines about where they propped up and everything. And now we look at timelines of different versions and variants. So we're familiar with timelines. There's timelines of the kings and queens of England, and timelines of presidents, and timelines of our own business or our own lives or our own careers. So we think in a very linear fashion, and we expect things to go forward in the future in that linear fashion. But our actual experience of time is messy. If you look back, your progress in your career, the progress of your business is not a neat thing. We create these lovely Gantt charts and we expect everything to just fall in place at the right time, but it doesn't. Some things happen quickly, and then there's this long period of time that nothing happens. Maybe we feel like we're going backwards. So time is messy. And if we start to think of time being messy, then when we look at the future, we don't automatically imagine it's going to just project out nice and neatly the way we expect it to. What else can we learn about time? Things occur slowly and then rapidly. And that happens with a lot of things. Like if you're trying to get fit in the beginning, it's so difficult to get fit. And then all of a sudden you're fit and now you can challenge yourself to the next level. When we're studying something, we're kind of working through and it doesn't make sense. We're learning new language or learning a new topic. And we have to create all the frameworks. And it's so difficult to understand how everything falls together, and then suddenly it makes sense, and then all the parts come together, and now we can move through the next part of the content because we've learned. Financially, this also happens. Ernest Hemingway had this quote in one of his characters in one of his books. Somebody asked him, how did you get into debt? And he said, in the beginning, slowly, and then quickly. So that is our experience of time. Again, if we think about time that way, if we start to see it that way, then when we look at things in the future, we can say, so big deal. We got this 3D printing. Somebody does something there, somebody does something there. Nothing is really happening. And then all of a sudden, you'll see a whole lot of organizations suddenly understanding what can happen with 3D printing. The same thing happened with podcasts. Everybody thinks podcasts are the hottest new things at the moment. Everybody wants to have a podcast or be on a podcast. But podcasts have been around for a very long time. And in the beginning, there was just a select few people who'd worked it out and were doing it. And they were saying, this is important. If you really want to, be in early, you should get into podcasting now. But it was very slow and sluggish. And then all of a sudden it took off, mostly because of COVID. COVID really got people to adapt this. So anticipate that in the future, that things will go slowly and then fast. Other things that are similar is that weak signals become strong. So as you develop your futures literacy skills, your futures thinking skills, you'll start to identify weak signals. And a weak signal is when you see something over there and something over there, and you just think that they're isolated events. And then all of a sudden, it's a strong signal that the world is changing in that direction. And you want to be able to identify those and pay attention. How do you do that? Scan far and wide. You're in a global chamber, talk to people in different parts of the world. Say, look, I've heard this has happened in Latin America, and somebody mentioned that it was happening in India. Is it happening in Kenya? Is it happening in Cape Town? Try and create a pattern or a picture for yourself so you can identify those signals, because they could be opportunities for your business or threats to your business. Then we talk about change. Change is natural, it's inevitable, but it's also obviously one of the primary things about the future is that things are changing. Generally, we like to say, we moan about, we tell stories that we don't like change. People don't like change. Our team doesn't want to change. Our senior department doesn't want to change. What we're actually experiencing is we don't like inbound change. We don't want people telling us what to do. We do like it when it is outbound, when we decide to do something. So we can just see this with the masks. If we heard that there was a communicable disease out there and we didn't want to catch it, and they said you could wear masks and you could clean your hands and you could socially isolate yourself, a lot of people would do that, okay? When the government says you have to, that's when people rebelled. Like, you can't tell me what to do. But if it came from us, then we would obviously want to do it. That's important for us to understand, because as we need to move into the future, if we're going with teams, if we're working with our teams or with our families, very often, if we've got an insight and we come to people and say, okay, this is what we have to do to change and get ready, people are going to, even if they actually technically agree, we're humans, we don't want to be told. So people will resist that change because they don't want to be told what to do. So that's a big challenge that we have to consider when we're looking at the future. Another thing we want to think about, and this is just a beautiful idea to keep in mind when you're looking at the future, is that it's plural, not singular. In fact, very often when we talk about futures, it's a plural. We talk about futures thinking, it's not a single word. It drives editors nuts. They keep trying to correct me. But the future is plural, not singular. There's lots of ways of looking at it, but this is a nice example. We are at this moment, in this present moment, experiencing something together. We can anticipate what is coming in the next half an hour. We're still in this meeting, we're still talking and sharing ideas. And maybe you know what's coming in an hour's time. Maybe you can anticipate what's on your calendar tomorrow. So you've got all of that planned. But the further and further we get from this present moment, the less certainty we have of what is coming. And also, because there are so many of us in this room and people watching this recording afterwards, we're experiencing different things and anticipating and expecting and wanting to create something different into the future. So our being together at this moment represents already multiple anticipated futures. And then when you sit down and actually start to create futures ideas and scenarios, then you're intentionally creating multiple pictures of potential futures so that you can start to play with different ideas. So the future is very much a plural activity, not a singular. And then one more, just to kind of illustrate this, we very often confuse these two things, this moment in time with a trend. And the sooner you can identify an isolated event with a trend, the better you will be in terms of creating opportunities. I'll tell you a quick story. About a decade and a half ago, I owned a small business, a franchise, and I had an opportunity to get some funding for it. I did all the paperwork. They came and assessed. They lent my business money because we had 2 or 3 really good months. And so it looked like we were on an upward trend. And about 6 months after the loan, we started folding up the business. We had made too many mistakes and we could not keep this business alive, and we closed the business down. And it had terrible financial implications on myself. All the staff that I had to retrench, they've all gone on to do other things, but I had to carry the can with the actual business. But after all the drama of it, I sat down and I looked at my financials and I thought, how did this go wrong? How did this funding company give me money and do all the assessments and interviews and everything else, and it still went wrong? What happened there? And when I looked at the 3 good months we had, and I drilled into the figures, and I drilled in deeper and deeper, I identified that those 3 good months weren't an upward trend. What actually skewed the figures were 3 specific sales. 3 sales represented by 2 different clients suddenly made our period of time look like we were on the up. So what we identified as a trend were just actually 3 isolated events. And that mistake cost me my business. And in costing me my business, I've had to pay this off for over a decade to try and recover from that mistake. And this is the kind of thing that futures literacy will allow us to start to identify. All right, so we've had anticipate the future. That's our A. B is to challenge our beliefs about what we know and what we're doing. C is we want to make better choices, and better choices means we really want to kind of think about how we're thinking about the future and find better ways to do it. I'm going to give you a model of that in just a moment. It's my compass model, and it kind of give you a bit of an idea about how to actually follow through some steps so that you can start to prepare for the future. Before I do that, I'm going to show you some benefits of futures thinking. And also after that, there's a QR code. If anybody wants to ever make an appointment with me, scan the QR code. You can book an appointment in my calendar. I'd be very happy to have a conversation and unpack some of these ideas. But I want to show you the benefits of some futures thinking. And it's just kind of like lists of ideas. Let's see where it's going. It allows us to develop a flexible mindset. A fixed mindset is going to keep us locked in old beliefs, old models, old ways of doing things. And while they may not necessarily be wrong, if we are not flexible enough to explore alternatives, we might end up in the wrong direction and making a big mistake. Futures literacy gets us to keep updating our skills. So we keep paying attention to what we need to learn. And updating our skills does not mean we have to go back to formal education. It does not mean a degree or an MBA or a doctorate. It means you're paying attention, you're experimenting, you're practicing, you're aware of skills that you might need to develop. It encourages you to be prepared to reinvent. So in my career, I'm doing these different things. I kind of reinvent myself from one direction to another. But that's something that we all have to do as possibly careers or professions come to an end. We've come to the end of our skill set. We might need to do something different entirely, in the next part of our career. Maybe we're facing retirement and we want to reinvent so that we actually have something valid to do during retirement, which doesn't rely on old skills. So we need to be constantly ready to reinvent. We can discover and develop new opportunities. I'm talking to my children these days, and what we're suggesting about them for their future, they are creating new career opportunities that don't even exist at the moment. So you don't have to even fall in line with what somebody else says is a career. You can come up with your own ideas. We can develop scenarios and plans to cope with potential hazards. So what are the problems that are coming down the line? Can we anticipate them? And then we can prepare for them. It doesn't mean that nothing bad ever happens. This is the real world, okay? Tough things happen to us. But the more prepared we are, the less devastation we experience when we've anticipated it with those scenarios. There's some more benefits. We can invest long-term financially in our futures, in our families, in our education, in our children's education. We can invest long-term when we've got a better idea of what that looks like. We can stay in business, and that's not a small thing. We can focus our efforts in the right direction. Very often when we talk about people improving their professional development skills, some people are improving their skills in a skill set that might become null and void in the future. You don't want to become incrementally better day after day after day in something that is becoming irrelevant. So we want to put our efforts in the right direction. We want to grow in the right direction, even if we have to start from the beginning again. So focus our efforts, guide our children, and help our employees. Our children need some direction about what to do with their lives, and just telling them to get a good degree and a good job is not going to cut it anymore. And we want to help our employees, our teams, people in our family. As we develop futures literacy and we start thinking in terms of the future, then we can help people to cope with the anxiety about the future. We've got a young person visiting at the moment with my children, and she's 19 years old. She's got a great career ahead of her. She's fantastic. She's got so much going for her, but she's already anxious about the future. And she doesn't want to think too far ahead because she just gets scared. So we're just talking through it, and I'm demonstrating how her skills will help her. And she doesn't have to have everything mapped out, on a Gantt chart for the next 10 years. She can trust that she's learning the right skills to be able to develop in the right direction. So giving people that encouragement is really valid and valuable. And we can leave a legacy. We can leave a legacy in terms of the future we want to create for people that are come after us. All right. So folks, I just want to encourage you, if you do want to talk to me, I love having these kinds of conversations. There's no agenda. I'd love to hear your challenges and just to talk you through that with you. So if you do want to book an appointment with me, you absolutely can. But what I'd like to show you now is a model that I use to help people to actually plan the future. So you're going, okay, now what? And how do I learn this stuff? What do I do next? This model, I have a model called a map, compass, and guide. So the map is a map of time. I'm the guide, but I want to pass that guiding skill over to other people. But the compass is what I'm going to show you now. And the compass encompasses all of the models that are out there, all of the, if you ever watch a futurist on YouTube, if you ever read an article on LinkedIn about this model or that model or this bit of information about the future, any of that information will be able to fall somewhere into this compass. So it's a really nice place to start. So I'm going to take you through it, and then I'll tell you when you can take a screenshot, and that screenshot you can finish this call and you can start your futures plan after that. So here it is. It's a compass. You'll see I use a lot of gears and things. I just love steampunk, so it all kind of falls in line there. But this compass encompasses inside of that. You can see some of the models that we work with, and each one of those we could spend 2 or 3 days studying. And that's just too heavy. The idea of futures literacy is you learn your ABCs, you learn the language, you learn the words, and then you develop on that and you grow deeper and deeper, and you move from futures literacy to futures fluency. So let's take you through this one by one. The first step is you gather intelligence. And gathering intelligence can mean so much. First of all, this meeting is step one. You are on your first step of your own futures plan. You're gathering intelligence about what is futures literacy? How do I think about the future? What does this mean? When you start scanning, if you're reading headlines around the world, you don't have to read deeply. You don't have to, read doctoral theses or anything. You just actually need to read headlines to get an idea of what is happening around the world. And you can dive down into an article when it's relevant to you. Gather intelligence. Gather intelligence about your industry sector in other parts of the world. Gather and compare. So if you are in a nonprofit, spend some time looking at what big multinationals are doing. If you're in a big corporate, look and see what governments are doing in terms of marketing or funding or communication or anything like that. You just want to keep expanding your mind, just like your muscles, so that you can get new ideas. And that is all gathering intelligence. You don't have to make sense of it all yet, but you do have to gather an awareness of what is going on. Otherwise, you just have this very narrow vision of the future, and you're going to get stuck. So what is step 2? Explore change. We've already talked about change, that we tend to, rebel against it. But if we can communicate change in a way that it comes from within us rather than being imposed on us, then it's helpful. The other thing to understand about change is that it's the change in state that really bothers us. So it's not being here or being there. It's the movement between the two ideas. The movement, that kind of reinvention period, that messy period when you don't quite know what is happening, and then you find your feet, now you're in the other place. That in-between part is what we don't like. If you know that, you can get yourself through change a lot quicker, and you can help your team too as well. Then describe the future. And this is my favorite part, because now we're creating scenarios. We're imagining what the future could look like. And when we can paint a picture of the future, then we can say, how does my business, my career, how does this work in this version of the future, this potential version? And then you find ways to create logical plans to respond. So a scenario, broadly, you can create 3: an awesome, wonderful scenario, the dystopian, terrible scenario, and then our normal one that we do, the regular middle of the road one. And we normally create that business plan, that marketing plan, that middle of the road version, but do it for the extremes as well. When you do that scenarios exercise, when you imagine a perfect, wonderful world where all your dreams come true and you have the best clients ever, you get very excited. It can be a thrilling mind experience, and you're full of emotions. You need to get past those emotions to make logical, practical plans about how to deal with that world. And the same thing happens with that dystopian, negative version, the worst case scenario. What if something comes after COVID that makes COVID look like child's play? We don't want to think about that, but we need to be responsible in terms of developing that thinking. So we get past the emotions of this is scary, this is terrible, what will we do? Once we're past the emotion, in this nice, safe place right here today, we then create some practical plans. If these terrible things happened, these would be things I would need to consider. So whenever those other extremes or any version of them in between, when they actually happen, as you start to experience the emotions, as everyone in the team and around you is now panicking about what is happening, you know that there's emotion, you'll move past the emotion, and then you have some plans already sketched out that will help you to make logical decisions so that you don't panic. And then our last one, like any good strategy, is you're going to test it. You're going to go back and there's various ways to kind of test, if you're making a futures plan, what does it look like? So those are the 4 steps. This is, go here, gather intelligence, manage change, describe the future, and then test your strategy. And those 4 steps is all you need to do to get started with futures thinking. So your first step after you've done that is to learn futures literacy. And I do have a free ebook. If you do contact me, I can send it to you, or I can send it to Derek and he can pass it on. So there's a free ebook, but I also have a course that will take you through some of these ideas in a deeper experience so that you can actually learn. I'm going to take you back right to the beginning of my presentation to this family photograph. And I love my parents. I love what they tried to do for me. But my father did the best that he could with the experience and in the place in the world that he had at the time. And as I grew up and got married and had my own children, I wondered, how would I prepare my children for the future? So this is my family photograph. That's me on the corner, and my daughter Hannah and her stepsister and her other sister and her dad in the background. And this was about a year and a half ago, when we went to the airport. We put her on an airplane and we sent her to the Netherlands because she wants to go and study a creative business degree in the Netherlands, overseas. She doesn't know what she's going to do, but a creative business degree covers a whole lot of different things. The experience of going overseas and challenging herself in a different culture is developing skills and coping mechanisms in her that she could not learn at home. We don't know what she's going to do. She doesn't know what she's going to do, but she's developing skills and approaches and insights into the world that will take her so much further than I could even have ever done in my career at that age. And that was the best thing we could do for my children, for our family. That is what we're looking at with futures literacy. And I'm going to end with this very last comment. I'm a professional futurist. I study this, I write about it. But my belief is that we are all futurists. We're all automatic, natural futurists. If you have a business, you're a futurist. If if you're anticipating the future or your children's education, if you have plans for retirement, you're a futurist. But you can become a better, more effective, more conscious, more intentional futurist with a little bit more insight and practicing this new skill of futures literacy. I thank you very much for allowing me to share with you, and I'd love to hear if there are any questions or comments. Thank you, Derek.
Wow, Charlotte, really good stuff. Thank you so much. Every time I listen to you, I learn something new. Thank you so much for breaking this down, for sharing with us and being vulnerable, talking about your family, and finally, helping us to be able to see that we can actually make a predictable future for ourselves. And you shared with us some wonderful models that we can use. I just want to, that story that you shared about your daughter, what she decided to do in contrast with what I decided to do during the pandemic. So for those of you who may or may not know, when our world shut down, so to speak, in March, I did not leave the house for a year. And when I said did not leave the house, I mean exactly that. Wow. I left the house to go get my first vaccination for 1 year. I didn't know what was going on. I could not predict the future. And so I wish at the time I'd had this valuable information. So thank you so much for sharing. I'm sure there are questions from our wonderful guests. And so guys, I'm going to just open the floor. We're an intimate group, so you can unmute and shoot your questions over to Charlotte, and I'll try to moderate the conversation for the few minutes that we have left. Don't be bashful.
I'll speak up then, right? So
go for it, Chris.
Just to say that I thought that was really great. I mean, I really did actually. So, congratulations. Made me think about a lot of things in the sense, but I was also really interested about what you were talking about with kids, because a lot of it seemed to me to come back to kind of these age-old things about the way that you teach, and it's all about life skills, isn't it? And you said about your daughter, I was really proud of my kids who've kind of gone off and done sort of crazy things, like my daughter, who was, when she was 16, went over to Argentina for a year, living and learning in a school over there. My son, who cycled around the world, took him 2 years, never been anywhere cycling before in his life, just took off. And then, and my daughter's just about to go back now to go and teach in Colombia for another year. And this is all about, and I'm not taking any kind of sort of well done me type of thing, but I know that when we were with our kids, we were always more about, it's not the academic achievements which are the most important things.
Mm.
It's about everything else, you know. And anyway, and I thought it was just great. The only thing when you get to the compass bit, and that's where I sort of start to think, yeah, but that, I said horrible word, the but word, but
Yeah.
it's like, and then that all starts to look a bit scary and a bit kind of academic, and it's like, where do you start to process those bits and pieces. And but anyway, I thought it was great, and yeah, I thought it was great. There you go. Thank you very much. And like I said, I don't really have any questions because I thought it was so great. That was all. Oh, and I was very proud of the fact that I guessed it was a microchip as well. Right.
Yeah, good. Well done.
Thank you.
Charlotte, it seems like what you're sharing is that we need to do better in educating young people. And so what are there some specific things that you advocate, like either to governments or to business leaders or others to get us more prepared for these non-linear changes, which for me was the main thing that I took away. Is I always do these planning things like extrapolate, right? And it's like, why? It's nonsense. And just one quick thing about Endicott, New York, where IBM was founded, the mainframe. I actually went to Thomas J. Watson Senior Elementary School, which I found out when I searched for it. It is above average elementary school, which I felt good about. But the school was named after him because that's where IBM's mainframes were invented. That was after Endicott Johnson Shoes was the #1 shoe company in the US, totally went out of business after World War II, replaced by IBM, was going to be the future of Endicott, New York, with all these mainframes. Totally, mainframe business went out of business, right? So Endicott, New York is a microcosm, I think, of all the non-linear things you talked about, from boom to bust, and now, honestly, quite busty if in that frame. So what should we be doing differently?
So there's actually a lot of people, in the futures world, a lot of people have their the specialities in terms of what they work on. And a lot of people are focusing on this futures literacy and bringing it to older generations. But there is some work to try and get it into education systems. Here in South Africa, with our history, with apartheid and things like that, we have been very challenged with the history that is being taught, the history syllabus in the schools. So there's been a lot of work, and in fact, a call by one of the government ministers that history should be a compulsory subject right the way to matric, to the end of school. And I'm thinking history is a great subject. I studied philosophy in university, but history in school was the best subject that I took because it got me to think and understand. But if we could design a curriculum that brought history and the future together. So here's the history. This is the implication of the consequences of what happened. Now, if we move that into the future and we project it, this will be the implications of that kind of bad policy making. That kind of skill would teach children so much more than just history on its own, or in fact, just futures on their own. So if we could create that kind of curriculum, and I know that there are people working on that. But the problem we have with education is I know what to do with my children. I know what to advise for my nephews and my nieces, but I don't know that it's so difficult for a national government to change a program for the entire school system for a country. So that's a bigger challenge, which is a problem.
Wow, really great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Great. All right. Any other questions? Charlotte, I'm sure you've seen the chat. A lot of thank yous coming in.
Thank you.
I think you've really sort of pried open people's minds, and this is something that they will. I remember when I first listened to you, and I went and I started doing a little bit more research, and really it was a topic that to me I found fascinating, particularly in the world that we're living in. I mean, it couldn't be more timely. So any other questions, guys, please feel free to unmute. We're not going to do the breakout rooms today or anything like that. I think we'll just continue to take a few more questions before we wrap up.
While we're waiting for another question, I actually just want to go back to Chris's comment about, at a certain point, it becomes very daunting looking at the future. And if you're looking at what needs to happen, it can be quite overwhelming. So I love to bring futures literacy back to language. I'm learning Spanish on Duolingo. Most people during the pandemic, so many people started learning languages, and I chose Spanish. And we got a family home that's out there, kind of distant family. So I spent a bit of time, and I love the culture. And so I started learning this. And so I would look, I've got a futures colleague who sent me his dissertation, PhD dissertation in Spanish. And I know what he talks about, and it's so interesting. And I sit there with Google Translate, and I translate one sentence at a time. And that you can't operate like that. It's just way so far beyond me. But I started just learning the language on Duolingo, and you go through the classes and you learn a little bit at a time. And then, you're learning a noun, and you're learning a verb, and then an adjective, and then the colors. And then one day it all comes together, and you read a sentence and you know what it means. And that is just so exciting to be able to understand something in a different language. And when I look at the future, even as a futurist, it's such a broad topic. There are so many models. There are so many approaches. It can be overwhelming for me to look at it like that. So I find the parts that resonate with me, the parts that resonate with the people that I work with. And what I want to do with the models is say, this is a good, robust academic model. And here's how to make it work so that you can explain it to your child so they can choose school subjects. And if we can make it, that kind of approachable, practical way, then we can find futures plans that work for us. And that's why all of that stuff is just in those 4 steps. We just need to become more aware and gather information. We need to think about how things are changing. We need to think about what the future will look like, good or bad or in between. And then we need to say, well, is the plan that I've just designed going to fit in with that? And if we keep it that simple, then we can mature in our thinking, and we move from literacy to fluency eventually. But it's not a race, and we're all learning together.
Fantastic. Well said, Charlotte. I just want to give a quick plug again for your ebook. And if you want to get access to that ebook, you can talk to me, or you can go to Charlotte's website, which is futuresalchemist.com. I should pop that in the chat. Yeah. Futuresalchemist.com, and you can get a link to her ebook, and also take a look at her curriculum. As she said, this is such a vast subject, and it can be a little bit overwhelming, but I think she does a really nice job with her curriculum, breaking it into manageable chunks so that we can easily understand the information.
Thank you. Derek, the book is, if you go onto the website, the book is available. The link will take you to Amazon. Yeah. But if you email me directly, I'll send you a copy of the book. But it is, and there's another page where I post different public events where we have these open webinars that Derek's referred to. And we just love people coming into those meetings and sharing ideas.
Fantastic. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've reached the top of the hour, a few minutes past, so I don't want to hold you any longer. I'm sure you have busy schedules. I just want to thank our speaker again, Charlotte. That was amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us and introducing us to a topic that I don't think many of us are familiar with. So thank you so much for that. Doug, Cesar, I want to thank you guys for giving me the opportunity to put this event together, and of course all the other EDs I can see around the room and everybody else associated with the Global Chamber for being able to attend, and our guests. Again, please feel free to leave your information in the chat so that we can all connect on LinkedIn. And Doug, I don't know, do you want to say any final words?
I'm good. I'm just really impressed by what we learned today, the recollection and the reminder that we need to think thoughtfully and creatively and in blocks and in exponential terms, and that these changes in life, two things, right? Sometimes we get so frustrated by lack of progress, right? Really, I think, Charlotte, what you're saying is be calm, that's normal, and just keep working, and eventually there'll be a breakthrough. And we know from our own experiences, right, that's what happens. So it goes back to some of the values, I think, of being part of Global Chamber, and the Global Tribe characteristics are we tend to be flexible and resilient and steady and professional and moving forward and optimistic, and those are characteristics that are well suited for the future and whatever that might bring, and capturing the opportunities. So thanks again, Charlotte, and thank you, Derek, for bringing us on this journey.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Doug. All right, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your day or evening. And from Nairobi and from Cape Town, we are going to bid you adieu. Remember, you can build a predictable future for yourself. Take care, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
All the best.
Bye-bye.
Thank you very
Cheers.
much.
Bye.